Animator Nick Ranieri got into the animating business because his older brother liked to draw, and Nick always wanted to do what his older brother did. The wrinkle is, Nick's older brother got out of the drawing game shortly thereafter, and Nick stuck with it, which led, by and by, to Sheraton College outside of Toronto, where Nick enrolled in the animation program. And that led to Canadian animating jobs where Nick sharpened his skills on a plethora of Canadian commercials. After a while, Europe beckoned, and Nick soon had a job as an assistant on a film called Who Framed Roger Rabbit. But the assistant work lasted only until his reel of commercial work was seen, and he got promoted to animator. Are we detecting a trend here? Nick was seen as a skilled practitioner of his craft early on and was quickly moved up the proverbial ladder. The same thing happened at Disney Feature Animation in Burbank, where Nick found himself animating on mega hits like The Little Mermaid, then supervising on Beauty and the Beast, Pocahontas, and Hercules, among numerous others. Nick talked about his creative life and career at the Animation Guild on April 11th, 2014. We're talking today to Nick Ranieri, and Nick, you started, let's go back to the beginning. I've talked to a lot of animators and designers like that, and they all seem to have started drawing at a really young age, like 4 and 5. They were doing comics and they were doing this. So what was your background? When did you get interested in cartoons and animating and drawing?
Well, I was somewhat of a TV kid, and so I watched Saturday morning cartoons like everyone else, and really into Warner Brothers, really into that type of thing. Disney was a studio that would we would go and see the movies every 4 years or whenever they came out. But for the most part, it was the Warner Brother cartoons that sort of inspired me.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. I didn't really start drawing really young. I was 9 years old, and the only reason I started drawing was because I was copying my brother.
So your brother was the artist before you were?
Yeah, and so if he did something, I would copy it and do my version. If he did a scrapbook, I would do a scrapbook. If he did whatever, I would do whatever he did, and siblings, he would always go, stop copying me. But the difference is that when I started to draw, I continued, and he continued for a while too, but his passion was more theater and acting and things like that. So
okay.
He went off and
so he didn't stay in the artistic track.
Well, not professionally, no. He continued to draw a little, but he was frustrated. He said to me once that he didn't like to draw; he liked to have drawn. He always
liked to look back on it.
Well, yeah, he didn't like the process of drawing. He liked to have drawn something nice and he didn't want to go through all the process of studying things and all. He just said, I want to draw a tiger. I just want to draw it. That's all. And there it's done. I just want that thing done. I don't want to have to work out how to draw it. And so he didn't have really.
But you liked working out how to draw it?
Well, yeah, I trying to improve your craft and trying to study those type of things, anatomy and even animal anatomy and things like that. That was kind of interesting. I took some painting courses and stuff, but trying to improve that part of the craft as well. But the big thing was I wanted to be a cartoonist of some sort. I even went to the school. They have those counselors that talk about careers and things like that. And,
was this in high school?
Yeah, and they said, oh, you know what, 1 out of every 5,000 ever gets a job as a professional cartoonist, so, don't even think about it.
Don't worry about it. It's not going to be something you're going to do.
Yeah. And so I thought, well, what else is there? And someone said, well, what about animation? And they suggested that I go over and take a look at Sheraton College because it was like 20 minutes away.
And this would have been in the early 80s then,
This
right?
is late 70s. And so I said, well, let's take a look. So I went over to the college, and they had a display up of some of the students' work. And for the first time, I discovered what animation was. Like, oh, I get it, the cell, and they draw it on one side and they paint it on the other. Oh, is that how that works?
You had no idea.
I had no idea, because back in the 70s there were very few books or anything on animation.
There was a Walter Foster art book,
and that. Yeah,
and that was about it.
Yeah, and that was really sparse. Maybe a Fleischer story or Tex Avery book or something. But those were all out of print. And
you didn't have a little 8mm camera and your little camera stand, and you were.
No, I because I didn't. I mean, maybe I did some flip books. I think that was about as much as I did.
Drawing in the corner of the textbook in high school, and the plane landing, and the.
But I mean, the first thing I did is in school was one of the first major things I did is I did a comic book with all the teachers' characters.
Comic books, yeah.
And
storyboards, comic books.
Yeah, and so I did this comic book and had these little vignettes with all the teachers and all the caricatures I did of all the teachers. And they allowed me to print it up and sell it to the school. And
this is in high school.
This is in high school, and they approved it, except for one. There was one where I did a
little on the edge.
Well, it was a little on the edge because it showed that the one teacher had no control over his class. And this was a sweet guy. He was just very low key, and he didn't have control over his class. They were rowdy, but he wasn't that type of person that would, lay down the law. So I did this one thing where he was just talking, and I have homework for you, and they're all screaming and yelling, you're stupid.
You had to remove that.
Yeah. He says, well, if you don't want to do it, just bring it in tomorrow and I could do it for you. And, all this stuff. And it was just this really low key thing. And they said, no, you can't. You have to take that out. It's like, okay, fine. But other than that, I was able to publish it, and they had to get the student body involved. And the student body, they were like morons. They're like, well, let's sell it for 50 cents. I'm like, and I said, well, okay. And so afterwards, I tried to, I got them all printed up, but they cost like 56 cents to make. And the student body.
So you're losing 6 cents on either one.
Yeah, but they sold out in an afternoon. But they, the student body is like, well, it lost money. Well, then you guys sold it for 50 cents.
Sell it for $1.
Yeah, I probably would have.
And you would have sold out.
Yeah, but student body.
So did you go to Sheridan straight out of high school?
Out of high school, yeah. I went. I started out. I had bad marks in high school in my art class.
In your art class?
The artwork I would get 8. He graded out of 10, and he would never give anybody a 10 out of 10 because that means it would be perfect. So the most you could get was a 9 out of 10. So a lot of my assignments were 8 out of 10s, 9 out of 10s. I think the lowest I got was a 7. The thing that brought me down was his dry approach to art history. He would copy things on the board, and we'd have to write them all down and study them, and that was the art history. And it was such a drag. So I would get like...
You didn't do well on the test.
No, I got like 10 out of 100 on my tests and stuff.
Yeah, that would tend to drag your...
So my grade went into the hole, and they said, you can't get in. You'll have to take art fundamentals first because your grades are too low. And art fundamentals was this class where this year where you took all these classes of different subjects, textiles, lino block carving, photography, design, illustration, life drawing, animation was part of it. Well, that was for people who didn't know what they wanted to do. I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to get into animation. And it was interesting because after I saw how they did the animated cartoon and stuff, I was thinking about it, and it wasn't until I saw the film Popeye, Alibaba and the 40 Thieves.
Oh, the featurette.
The featurette. And that was the one that got me interested in animation. I know it's weird. It wasn't a Disney film. It wasn't a Warner's film. It was that one. And I was, for some reason, just taken by that character. And that's what got
So it was
me interested.
Popeye that got you
It
interested?
was
in
Popeye that got me interested in animation.
Well, that was a terrific. I remember seeing that as a kid. That's a terrific film.
It is. It was beautiful, and it was really
One of their early
fluid.
Technicolor films.
Yeah, and I just loved that character. I drew that Popeye character all the time. It was just, I don't know, something about it. It was the way they drew it in the late '30s, when they really fine-tuned it. It was before they sort of streamlined it and messed it up and put him in a sailor suit for the Paramount stuff, and after they were drawing him crudely in the early '30s, when it just started out. It was that.
Those early Technicolor, and they made 2 featurettes. They made
3
Alibaba,
featurettes.
or they made 3.
They made Aladdin and His Wonderful Lamp and Alibaba and the Sinbad.
3.
And those were great, and so I really got into those, and but begrudgingly, begrudgingly, I took the art fundamentals because that was the only thing available to me. So I went in there. I got an A+ in animation, B in drawing. Everything else I flunked out on because I was wanting to do my own film, and I took time out. I sort of flaked on textiles and a lot of these other classes, and this one John Wheeler class, the persistence of vision. No, that wasn't it. What was it? I can't remember. Concepts or something like that. It was ambiguous. Ideas, space is stronger than mass, and all these really ambiguous ideas and things like that. And the way he taught was really bizarre, and I flunked out on that. In fact, I flunked out on 5 courses.
So you either got A's or F's.
Pretty much. And I finished the film, but they didn't care. They just saw my marks. And when I talked to the people, they said, "Well, we're not going to let you into animation, because looking at your marks, obviously you would make it in the animation industry anyway." So
little did they know.
Yeah, so it's like, well, I took a year off. I did some bumpers.
So you did 1 year at Sheridan.
I did 1 year at in Art Fundamentals. They wanted me to take it again. I refused to take it again because the marks wouldn't have changed. I wanted to get into animation. So I took a year off, and I did some bumpers for a local TV station. And after I finished that, I showed those, and based on those, they let me into the animation program.
And this is by now the early 80s, or is this?
This was early 80s, yeah. And I was on academic probation for the first semester. And it was interesting because there's these people. I remember my first day there. Vivian Ludlow was the teacher, and she was standing up trying to describe how to animate a waving flag. And so I'm sitting there and I'm listening, and the concepts were not unusual to me. You do this, you do that, it comes around, it's this type of action. Okay, I got it.
Yeah.
I got it. And I'm taking it all in, and I'm thinking, yeah, I think I can do this. And in the middle of it, she looks at me and she says, "Don't you think you better take notes?" Fine, okay, take notes. So, but you get a sense of it. You understand what she's talking about, and it's like, okay. So I was able to do that, and all the other assignments, and that initial year at Sheridan was where they sort of separated the wheat from the chaff. A lot of people would put forth their material, and you'd get that is great, or you'd get maybe animation is not for you. And
but you were doing better at this point because you were out of the abstract concepts and into actually the doing.
Yeah. It was just those exercises sort of got you thinking about just basic movement and just technique and things like that. After 6 months, I was taken off academic probation, and I did the full 3 years.
Wow!
In second year, we started on an ambitious project. It was our second year film was called Common Problems, and I did a lot of the caricatures of political figures. The Olympics were being held in L.A.
It was 84.
In 84. So the mandate came down that we had to do films that had Canadian content in it because they wanted to show them at the festival. So everyone's sitting around, oh, what do we do? It has to either have Olympics or Canadian content. It's the first time in the history of the college where they actually mandated the concepts and ideas that had to be put forth in your films. So, some of the other guys did, Olympic films and things like that. One guy did a film about the Mounties. And so we did House of Parliament. And I did caricatures of all the political people and the Prime Minister, Trudeau at the time, and leader of the opposition and all this stuff. And we just did this really stupid joke about them arguing over something in the House of Commons, and at the end, the Madam Speaker stops everyone and says, okay, I think we've decided, let's go to McDonald's for lunch. And they all run out, right? And that was the end. It was a stupid joke, but it gave us...
a button.
Yeah, basically, we started them out, and they had all these economic discussions about all that. You didn't know what the heck they were talking about. And then we just took a big piece of paper and we wrote gags and stuck it right in the middle, because we had our intro, we had our outro, and we just needed to fill it in with all this, goofy stuff, and that's what we did. And we didn't finish it, but I was determined to finish it. Came in that summer of '83, and I sat down, and everyone else, Rick Sluter, who was on it with me, had a job, so he couldn't work on it. Cal LeDuc had a job, and he couldn't work on it. So I was there all summer working on it, which was great because that summer was a great summer. Chuck Jones came up and visited the college, and I got to sit in on that. Yeah, and that was great. I asked him a question that he refused to answer.
You want to tell me what it was?
I said, I always wondered, why did Bugs Bunny's design change throughout from the 40s to the 50s to the 60s? I mean, there's certain elements in his design started to change. What brought that on? And Chuck's, why ask why? And he started going into all this philosophical stuff. He never answered the question. Obviously he didn't have an answer, but he just pontificated about why do we ask why, and what is the reasons that we ask these questions.
because some other director made out new model sheets and changed the design. That's why.
I guess, I don't know. It's just they just drawing styles change or things like that, whatever. But he didn't answer it. But still, it was great to meet him and all that.
Interact.
Yeah, that was great. But I managed to finish a certain portion of the animation on the film.
Did that make it into the Olympics?
No. Well, I think we missed the deadline.
Okay.
But what happened was I was still determined to finish this thing. So when we came back for third year, we all got together and said, we need to finish this picture. So we spent the entire first semester finishing that picture, and we got it done, and it actually won an award, and we won this thing called a short film showcase. And it was blown up to 35 mil and shown in front of, I think it was Fletch, across the country. So we got an award for that, and despite the teachers' comments, only Vivi was supportive. All the other teachers were like, they'd come by and they go, well, I like the beginning, but I hate the ending. Another teacher would come by, well, I hate, I like the beginning, ending, but I like the ending, Oh, I like the middle, but the beginning and ending don't work.
It's working. If somebody likes one part and hates another and there's no unanimity, then you've probably done your job.
Yeah. So as far as I'm concerned, I just said, I don't care what they think. I'm going to finish this film. At least it'll be a finished film. And if they like it, great. If they don't, they don't. So we finished it. It won some awards. And then we sort of graduated. The graduation, it was kind of a joke because no one ever got jobs with a diploma out of that college. You got jobs based on your portfolio.
Right. But you got your Bachelor of Arts. So.
Yeah. Or
Bachelor of Fine Arts.
It's funny. We're sitting there all in a row. The whole class, the animation class, are sitting there. And we had these little cards, and it said our name and what program we're supposed to hand it. And I'm sitting there watching it, and the guy is up there going, Joe Smith, interior design or whatever. Thank you. And he'd come up, and another person would come up, hand the card, and Sharon Smith, fashion, And that every now and then he would go, Stuart Jones with honors and all that. And I thought, that's interesting. So I took my card and I wrote on it. I wrote Telefest winner. Because there was a contest, CBC Telefest, and we got an award from there. So I put it on there, and I walked up, and as I walked up, I handed him the card. He goes, Nick Ranieri, animation, Telefest winner.
And the whole thing.
I'm like, wow, he actually said it. And I grabbed it, I walked down, and everybody in the row was going, hey, man, why did they call you out for that? And I was like, hey, I just wrote it on the card. And so they all started to write, and people were going with high honors. They were writing out all this stuff.
They'd read whatever was on the card.
But it wasn't until the guy got up, he almost read it. One of the guys wrote Grand Exalted Poobah. And he goes, Grand Exalt, and he stopped halfway through. And so it was just,
You imps.
Animation students, what do you want?
Imps. So it's 84 and you've graduated and you're a Grand Fest winner, and where do you go from there?
Yeah, we were looking for jobs, and the industry started to pick up. In Ottawa, they were doing a TV show called The Raccoons, and a lot of people were heading up to Ottawa, and so I did too, and I went up there all sort of brash and pompous, and I was very much big chip on my shoulder. I had done a film. I had won a contest, but they looked at it and they said, "We'll put you in layout." Layout, and I didn't do well. It lasted about a week in layout, and just wasn't working for me. And so they put me in animation, but they didn't make me an animator. They made me an assistant. And of course, my attitude was, "Oh, I'm too good for this. I should be an animator right away." And I can prove it because all these other people are some of them are lame, and I could do a better job than them.
And I'm an Anifest winner.
Yeah, I'm a Telefest winner. I'm a
Telefest winner.
Yeah, whatever. And so yeah, I was really full of myself in that time. It's one of those regrets.
So how long did you last?
Well, I lasted.
They kept you on.
They kept me on, but despite all that stuff, I would put up lists of animators, and rate them, stupid things like that, right? And the head of the assistant department, a guy named Roger Way, he said, Nick, you're a talented guy, but you need to cool it with this stuff. You're gonna make enemies, and I should have listened to him. But eventually, I was able to work my way up and actually become an animator at that place.
Now, what kind of stuff were you working on? Commercials?
It was raccoons. It was still raccoons, and I worked on that, and then I transferred over to another place, and they had specials they were working on, and I think there was some Rush video thing I did. Somebody just showed it to me recently. Horrible. Oh, it's horrible. And my stuff was horrible too. You got to learn somewhere.
At the time, you're learning, and you probably thought it was good at the time.
It's one of those. It's those things. You know what they say? You have 100,000 bad drawings in you when you start, and the sooner you get rid of them, the better.
Yeah,
it's the same thing.
That's true. I've heard that.
You've got whatever 1,000 bad scenes in you. The sooner you get rid of them, the better.
Hurry through them.
Yeah.
Move on to the next. So how long were you up there?
Oh, that was about a year and a half. I was up at Atkinson's, but you wanted to get to Disney, and there's my friend of mine who was up there named Dave Nethery. He was an American, so he could work down here. So he was able to leave and go work for Bluth, I think, American Tail.
Oh, okay.
And we were all like, envious because they were going there working for a big studio, and it was Steven Spielberg and all this stuff. But we couldn't leave. We were stuck there. But I still wanted to do better quality material, and at the time, commercials seemed to be the only thing. So a friend of mine, Jamie Olaf, had left and went to Montreal I was working for a guy named Pascal Blay. And
Now, at that period of time, we're talking the middle 80s.
yeah.
Is there a lot of animation work in Montreal and
Well, there were two studios.
Ottawa?
There was Pascal Blay and Mike Mills. And that was pretty much it. And Pascal was struggling because he was just brand new and he wanted to do a Mobius feature as well. So he was trying to get that going, but he was trying to do commercial work. And so I contacted him and he brought me on. Jamie and I worked on a couple of commercials together. It was a good learning experience, but he had struggles keeping the studio open because wasn't a lot of work, and it's at times Mike Mills would underbid him and things like that. So I stayed there for about I don't know,
18
less
months?
Yeah, no, less than about 8-9 months.
Yeah.
And then there was just no more work, and so I was talking. I had a call in to a guy named Greg Duffel, who was working. He had a place called Lightbox in Toronto, and so I left and went and worked for him for about 7 months. That was a very difficult time. I learned more from him than I had anybody else.
What kind of work were you doing?
Well, it was mostly commercials. Yeah, I remember there was one commercial when I got there. I had an epiphany. It was a commercial in Canada for this product called Dare cookies, and they were doing Dare Bears. It was a joke on Care Bears, and there was a scene where the character was walking along a conveyor belt with the cookies going on it and all that, and so I did this walk cycle and I was going to place it and all this, and he sat down. He said, "Well, that's a great walk cycle and all, but I think you're approaching it wrong." So he started because you didn't see the feet, you just saw the conveyor belt, and so he started to walk through, listening to the track, and he said, "Yeah, make your accents, hit the steps, it needs to flow, and the character's talking as he's walking," and he went through it, and he just sort of worked through it and used the body action to convey the broad accents, and I just sort of opened up. Before I would have just done a
Straight
cycle.
ahead.
I just would have done a cycle and just put dialogue. I never even thought about
Doing the whole thing.
Yeah.
The body language.
Body language is led by the dialogue and all that, and it all works together, and secondary action and all that stuff. And
Your eyes were open.
yeah, basically, and he taught me a lot. The problem is he was the head of the studio, the artistic head, and his partner Mary, she was the financial head. He would constantly ask for changes, and she would
say,
try to.
We don't have the money for that.
No, she would say, "You've got till Friday to finish this, and if you don't, we dock your pay." But I couldn't get to Friday because Greg kept asking for changes. So it was this constant struggle. I would be there till like 3 a.m. trying to get this stuff done, and he was also wanting to do it the way the old, 9 old men did it. Send it out, have it come back on film, and look at it in a movieola. I'm like,
there's no time for that.
There's no time. It's commercials. We got to get this stuff rolling. And it would be better if we had a testing machine so I can show you what I'm doing. You can make comments.
They didn't have like a digital video recorder.
Well,
something.
they could have, because Atkinson's had it. When I was on Raccoons, they had a one of those tape player things that it was crude, but at least you could see the timing.
Sure.
So he didn't have anything. Like, he sent everything out on film, and it would come back the next day.
Slow.
And it was, but he said it was good enough for the 9 old men. It was good. So I was very frustrated, and it just got to the point where tempers clashed, and he let me go. He just because we couldn't work it out. I was losing money and sleep.
I can imagine. 3 a.m. Was this 3 a.m. pretty much a standard thing?
In certain cases, it had to be, but I still didn't meet my deadlines, and Mary would come up and say, "Well, you're a day late, so we're going to dock you this much." And I wasn't making much to begin with, so I would get docked a day's pay because.
So your pay was based on your output?
Yeah, pretty much. It was a weekly check, but if I didn't hit my deadlines, it would. So it was a frustrating thing. And after we had the whole, I told him about this. I talked through it, And afterwards we talked, and he said, I really enjoy working with you, but it's tough, and I'm just sorry we couldn't continue. And I said, I respect you, Greg. I learned a lot from you.
And that
but,
was 7 or 8 months.
Yeah, and then I was out of a job, and I didn't know what to do. And I thought, well, I saved a lot of money, and a friend of mine was out of work as well, Cal, and we said, well, why don't we just go over to England, see what's there? And England was buzzing with, commercials. They were doing great commercials over there, and nothing really was happening in Toronto. So we went over. We stopped off at.
Now, as a Canadian, could you go to Britain and start working? Or
well, that was the thing. I really couldn't as a Canadian.
Yeah.
But I could as an Italian, and since my dad works for the Italian consulate, and he was an Italian,
Hence the name.
Yeah, I had an Italian passport. He got me an Italian passport, so I was an Italian citizen, really, based on lineage, and so I was able to work over there. And Cal,
okay, in London.
Well, yeah, it was EC, so I was able to work there. And Cal was grandfathered in because his family had, his grandfather was from England or something like that. So he was able to work there.
So you're both able to work there.
Yeah. So we went over and we stopped off in, where is it, Dublin.
Yes.
We were going over there, might as well look into
By
blues.
now, blues in London, in Dublin, right?
Yeah, and so we went over there. We stayed 3 days. We brought our reels, and we went over the first day. And I said, "Here's my reel, and can you give me an interview?" And she said, "Well, you just can't walk in off the street." And I said, "Well, I know, but I figure we're going to be here for 3 days. Maybe we can set up an appointment, and I can come in for an interview. And here's my tape and all that." So they took it, and we hung around the city for about 3 days. I came back on the last day, and I said, can I have an interview? And she said, "Well, there's no one to give you an interview right now. We're all busy, so if you come back tomorrow." And it's like, "Well, we're leaving tomorrow. We're going to go over to London." And she said, "Well, leave your stuff, and then come back when
On your way back.
on your way back." And I said, "Well, I only brought, this is the days of VHS, and I had one PAL tape to show, and that was it." And so I came back. I said, "Look, this is my only tape. So I'll tell you what, I'll leave you my resume, and I'll go over, and you contact me if you're interested." That's not all I can do. I have to show I have to have the tape to show it around.
Right.
So I left and didn't think anything of it. I went over to England, hit all the studios, Grillo's and Passion Pictures and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And nobody was hiring, but my main goal was Roger Rabbit. So I thought,
Well, now was that in work at that time?
that was in
Just starting up?
Yeah, it was it was into production. It was like 6 months into production. So I went over to Dick Williams' studio and talked to a guy named Andrew Ruhrman, who was in charge of the studio at that time. And he looked at my work and he really liked it. And he said, "Yeah, I think we could, work out something." And I said, "Great. So where's Roger Rabbit being done?" And he goes, "Oh, you want Disney." So is there a difference? Yeah, this is the commercial house. You want to go over to Disney UK, and that's in Camden Town. So he gave me the address, and I went over and talked to Don Hahn. And Don said, "Look, we looked at your reel, but we can't. You can't be an animator, and we won't. I'm getting a work visa for an assistant, so there's nothing we can do. I'm sorry." And I said, "Well, did I mention I had a European passport?" And he goes, "Welcome aboard."
Is that what he said?
And what I didn't know is that they were starving for people. In fact, later on during the production, I heard a couple of the production people talking, and they said, "Yeah, we put an ad in the paper for artists, and we get people sending in their needlepoint and things like that."
It wasn't working.
Well, the big problem is that Dick Williams made a lot of enemies. There are a lot of people who just wouldn't work for him, and there are a lot of people who he didn't want working for him, and so it was kind of difficult at the time to find people, and that's why they were promoting a lot of us. I started there as an assistant. They looked at my reel, and they said I was an assistant. and I wasn't an animator. And I found out later, the reason is because I put my work in chronological order. I didn't put the best stuff first. I put I just thought, well, they'll watch me and they'll see the progression, how much I got, how better I got throughout.
Got to cut out that early stuff and just have the.
So what they
stuff.
did is they turned on, the first thing they saw was raccoons. They went, this is crap. They turned it off and they said, assistant, boom. And, oh man. So I eventually.
So your chronology screwed you.
Exactly. It was the wrong thing to do. So what I did was I showed to the animator that I was working for, and I showed him the whole thing, and he said, yeah, you should be able to do this. There's some good stuff at the end. And so he showed it to Simon Wells. And Simon saw it, and he says, yeah, there's some interesting stuff, but he wouldn't go to Dick with this information. He just sort of kept quiet. So one day, this guy, my animator named David Brown, he was up, he was sort of being trained by Dick, and he did this scene of Baby Herman in the carriage, and he went up to show it to Dick, and Dick spent like 8 hours in the office with him, going over it and drawing over each drawing and talking about animation principles and all this. While he was doing that, David mentioned, I found this out later, that he says, there's this guy that's assisting for me who's really good. In fact, I think he's better than me. And I was shocked. I mean, Dick told me that at the end of the production. So I had to admit, I owe a lot to David.
You won't get too many leads telling them, well, a guy that's working with me is better than I am.
Yeah, I just can't thank
unusual.
David as more for saying that. That was just amazing. And so he said.
So how long was it before you were animated?
Well, what happened is during that moment, David came down. He said, "Hey, Nick, do you have your reel?" And I said, "Sure, here it is." And he ran upstairs. And about an hour later, he came back down and he said, "Pack up. You're moving up to the 5th floor. You've just been promoted." And obviously, he took him through all the raccoon junk and showed the commercials that I worked on at Pascal Blay, which included a live-action animation combination. I did 2 of those. I did it was an Obelix commercial for Diet Coke in Montreal, and then there was a Sugar Bear commercial in Toronto, and both were live-action animation combinations. And based on that, he promoted me.
Wow. How long were you there as an assistant before you got promoted?
About a month.
Oh, 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Not very long at all.
Oh yeah, I started as an in-betweener, moved to an assistant, and then so I got put up there, but it still wasn't a full-fledged animator, and I didn't know this. It was in the glorified assistant program.
Oh yeah, it's called animating assistant.
Well, basically what it was is Dick was assigned himself all the Baby Herman stuff, and he couldn't do it all himself and break it all down. So this was a training ground. A lot of us were in that, and I didn't realize what it entailed. And he would do these keys, and he would do them in, marker and Sharpie, and thin Sharpie, and these would be the keys. And what we'd have to do is we'd have to take those drawings, clean them up, and then break it down and animate all the stuff in between. But we would have those keys. When I got the scene, I looked at it and I thought, oh, these are very nice drawings. I thought they were layout drawings. I thought they were him showing what the character's size was and what he basically looked like. And I was supposed to follow them, but not too closely. So I just took it and I just animated what I thought the scene should be. And I showed it to him, all happy, and he just looked at it and started to shake. And of course, it was all open format. I think only he and Russell Hall had an office, but everybody else was out in the open.
So you're all out?
Yeah, and so he's like, what are you doing? Changing my drawings? You're, just out of high school or whatever, going against my 35 years experience. Who do you think you are? Screaming. Everybody's head came up over the table, and I'm just like, yeah. And, shaking and quivering in my boots, and I had no idea.
Nobody told you?
No, yeah. Afterwards, Andreas came around and he said, don't worry, that's Dick's like that. So I did the scene again, and it got approved. But yeah, that was
baptism by fire.
Exactly.
Or screaming.
And so yeah, that was
baptism by high decibel.
Yeah, but he the thing about Dick, he was a very passionate artist, if he liked what you did, he would just go, look at this, everyone, come on in, take a look at the scene, isn't it great? And if he hated what you did, this is crap, this is very emotional, at the time. Yeah. But that was good because he was an artist's animator, It wasn't like a money man or anything like that. I remember later on in the picture, Don Hahn was like, "Oh, we need to do some of this stuff has to be on twos. We have to get it done. This scene could go on twos. This scene could go on twos." And Dick was like, "Do it on ones. Shh, don't say anything. Just do it on ones." So he was always
tugging one direction and
the art. He was always
Dick's
for the art.
doing the other.
Yeah.
So how long were you on Roger Rabbit altogether? About a year?
See. Oh, it was more like 8 months. I started animating at the end of July in '87.
And they had been going for about 6 months when you...
Yeah, but the thing is that the way Dick works is he spent most of the time on the short. So the short was like 2/3 of the way finished when I got on. And none of the other stuff had been touched, maybe 1 or 2 scenes of the live action animation stuff, combination. And we had a screening in October with Zemeckis, the rough cut of the film. And afterwards, I asked him, "What do you think about the response?" And he said it was terrible. No one responded. No one laughed. I just don't know what to do. And I said, "Bob, you have to understand, think of your audience. We are a group of people, and all we see is a film that's not done, and the amount of work that we have to do in like 5-6 months." I was just like, how are we ever going to get this done?
So nobody's reacting to the film, they're just reacting to the amount of work they have to do.
I was. I don't know about anybody else, but I certainly was. The only thing I could remember about the screening, other than the amount of work we had to do, was that they put in the scratch music. And one of the scratch pieces was the theme to Peter Gunn, which took me right out of the movie because that's such a familiar piece.
Yeah.
But other than that, I don't remember much of the screening except just
There's a lot of work
fear.
you have to do.
Yeah. So
you can't laugh when you're fearful.
Well, yeah. So we had to knuckle down, and they had to give. I think they decided to set up the Toontown department down here in L.A.
Dale ran it.
Yeah.
Dale and Jane.
Yeah, and a lot of people,
because they weren't going to get it done otherwise.
Yeah, a lot of people were upset by that in
London.
In London, but nothing you could do. It wasn't going to get done if we didn't do it that way. So we still had 50 minutes worth of animation to do, and so it was 6 days, sometimes 7. I worked like 7 days a week there. The only time I didn't work was when I got sick. I got the flu, and it really bugged me too.
So
George Lucas showed up that day, and I didn't get my picture with him.
That's too bad. You did get your picture with Spielberg.
I got everyone makes a joke about that, but everybody who showed up, I was sitting right next to the door. No one came into that studio without me knowing about it. And
Yeah.
I had a camera sitting up on my desk all the time. And when anybody came in, I always got a picture with them because it was,
You were right there at the entrance.
yeah, and they were, this was kind of Spielberg's toy. He would bring guests over. The only 2 people I missed, he brought Christian Bale over when he was like 13 doing Empire of the Sun.
Right.
And George Lucas. Those are the only 2. Everybody else, I got a picture with Jim Henson, Christopher Lloyd, Bob Hoskins, all those the people that came through. Yeah, that's so, and I got a reputation, I remember I wanted to get a picture with
Nick's always in the picture with the big guys.
Yeah, I wanted to get a picture with Kathleen Kennedy and Frank Marshall, and Frank was like, "Oh, really, Nick, again?" Okay, all right, but I don't care because they're not going to remember that. But I'm going to have the photo, and so
You'll remember.
Well, yeah, and so everybody made fun of me, but everybody wanted copies of the pictures.
Sure, why not?
But the great thing about that whole experience, it was tough. But like I said, Dick was a friend to animators, and he allowed me to take a whole sequence, a whole section for myself.
What was the most memorable thing that you worked on that that was either the most memorable, the most challenging of the stuff that you remember vividly working on that picture? Do you remember?
Oh yeah, the toughest scene was this thing where he was waving the gold gun around and in the factory, and I'm very glad that they decided, not to use a real gun, because a lot of people had troubles trying to animate with those props that were floating in the scene, and
So you have to make it look like they're actually holding it, right?
yeah, exactly. So you've got these guns, and it's almost like the gun is leading the animation. It's really hard to do it because you've got these things on wires, and so the thing, it's like, all right, you're this thing.
It's not the way I animate it,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
You're stuck.
I often thought, man, if they did a sequel to Roger Rabbit, it would look so cool, because all you need is you just animate a placement, and they could put a real CG gun in it. The possibilities now are just amazing.
They keep saying they're going to do one, but
Yeah, they're not going to
who
do
knows?
it. I mean, Zemeckis kept making noise about it, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Really?
It's a shame. I would love to work on that. That would be great. But but anyway, that was the major scene. I had another sort of difficulty on that picture because James Baxter was up and rising, and they had to do the trailer, and all the scenes that they wanted for the trailer had to be animated in full and comped and everything, so
Sure,
that they could
color.
grab the little piece that they want and put it in the trailer.
Right.
So Russell Hall got the worst of it. He had like 75 feet of Jessica to do because they wanted a lot of the Jessica little bits in there. I'm not bad. I'm just drawing that way, some of those things. But he had to do the entire scene, so he was going nuts trying to get that stuff done. Andreas had like a 48-foot shot. I had a 14-foot shot, which wasn't bad. The problem wasn't so much the length of it, it was the complication, because the camera kept moving, pulling back, and it was the ton of bricks scene, and he was walking up and he was saying stuff to Doom, waving the gun around, and then the ton of bricks falls on him. But throughout the entire scene, the camera's slowly moving out, and he had to do all his animation, but get smaller and smaller. But a special little increments, It was really tough.
So you were drawing, they weren't sizing it down?
Well, what I did is I'd animate a bit, and then I would find the placement, and then I would Xerox some of my drawings down and go over them and shrink them, and,
Do it that way.
Yeah, so it was but, it took me like a week and a half just to get through that scene. And here's James, he helped out Andreas with half of his shot with the weasel at the sink, and he did it in like a week. And I was just like, he can do 24 feet in a week, and I can't even get 14 done. I should get out of the business. I should just get out of the business. And Andreas said, look, don't be so hasty. It's, everyone goes at their own speed. So it was good, Chuck Gamage, Andreas, Phil Nibbling, some of those guys were around to guide me through some of this stuff. Although there's one, story I like to tell about, there's this one scene where Roger Rabbit's supposed to fall down the steps, and it was the only scene where he actually cursed in the film, where he says, come on, Eddie, let's get the hell out of here, and ran down. They took that line out, but the scene was, Dick gave it to me. He says, okay, he runs down and he runs out. And I said, okay. And he says, I have to go to L.A. to deal with the Toontown section. So when I get back, I expect it done. So I'm sitting there trying to figure out, okay, he runs down, and Andreas goes, well, he's a rabbit, and we've never actually seen him hop. So we should make him hop down and zip out. So I did. I had animation. He hops it down and he spins and zips out. And I thought, oh, this is great. This is great. I came back and put it down. I showed it to Dick, and same thing. What did you do? You didn't follow the brief. I didn't want this hopping. What do you think you're doing? Of course, all the heads came up looking, well, what's going on? And
probably Andreas didn't say, I told him to do it that way.
No, I looked over to Andreas's desk, and he went,
yeah, well, that's usually the way. How many times I've walked into situations where somebody says, do it this way, and they do it, and somebody higher up goes, I hate it. And the guy that told him to do it that way goes, Yeah.
This is why when I supervise, I always say, well, I'd prefer you to do it this way, but let's talk to the director, you know.
Let's make sure.
Yeah.
Let's make sure.
So you know, that was an interesting situation, but you know, I fixed it. I actually tried to push to get that approved, but Zemeckis said he wanted it the other way, and I said, but you know, the dialogue, there wasn't time. It wasn't worked out quite well. The brief was kind of ambiguous. I wasn't sure what it was meant by it, and they looked at the scene again. They said, well, you know what? I think the problem is that there's not enough time to have him get out. So why don't you have him trip? Okay, so that's what I did. So I did that, and we tripped, and then they changed the ADR, the dialogue, and that's the way the scene came out. Yeah. So it wasn't all my fault. It was kind of difficult for some reason to get it done in the first place because there were some problems with it. But still, he didn't have to.
So you didn't get yelled at when the final was done, right? He was okay with it?
He was okay, yeah. No, in fact, after that, we became, it was very friendly. It was really a joy working with him, and we parted ways, you know, on good terms, and still that way. It was, in fact, 10 years later, they had a Roger Rabbit reunion. It was down at the across from the Cinerama Dome.
Oh yeah, sure.
And he said, "Yeah, I've been, you know, I hadn't seen him in 10 years," and he goes, "You know, I've been looking at your stuff there, and it's good stuff. You did a lot of good stuff." That was the best thing to actually know that
sure.
he,
10 years later, it holds up.
Yeah, and
That's
it was
what you want.
but he was aware of our work. You know, it wasn't just mine, but you know,
It's an
James
animator's animator.
Yeah. So that was kind of a nice thing to hear. But after that,
But when that was done, you left. Did you leave London immediately, or did you?
Well, everybody, you know, some guy named Marty Katz came over and said, "Your futures are assured. We're going to open, keep Disney UK going, and all this." I mean, yeah, our futures are assured.
Until
Little did we
they're not.
know that, you know, the assurance was that we would all be laid off. What does that mean? It could mean anything. Futures are assured. But they wanted to do Rescuers 2 there.
Oh, really?
That was the plan. And then it was just too expensive to keep it open. So that studio, I think, sort of closed and became Amblimation eventually.
Yeah, Amblimation did a whole string of pictures
Yeah.
there.
But by that time, I had left. Chuck Gammage said, "Well, why don't you just work here and do freelance?" Freelance scared me to death.
Meaning coming to L.A. and
Well, no,
doing-
he
or
said, "Why don't
staying in
you
London?
stay in London?" And I was just like, you have to know people, you have to have connections, you know. And so I just wanted to be as part of a studio. I wanted to work for Disney. At the time, Andreas, Ron and John had sent him a cassette. And on one side it had Mermaid songs, you know, final songs for Mermaid, and on the flip it had Aladdin demos. And he said, "Why don't you listen to this?" And I did, and I love the Mermaid stuff. But the Aladdin demos, you know, they were just demos, so they weren't finalized, so I wasn't even sure about what the Aladdin film was all about or anything. You know, when you think Aladdin, you think, that type of Middle Eastern type of music, and this was all jazz. So I was like, wow, this is kind of unusual.
Ashman Menken.
Yeah. But I didn't know it was Ashman and Menken at the time. I don't know why I didn't connect the two, but I heard Mermaid, and it sounded different.
That thing was pretty well along, and Aladdin was way out there.
So when I finally got, I called up John Musker from London, and I said, I really want to work on this. And so I figured, I talked with James, who also wanted to work there as well. And we actually said, well, after we get to New York for the premiere of Roger Rabbit, let's fly out. And Andreas said, yeah, I'll put you up while you're here, and you go over to Disney and see about getting a job. Little did we know that they probably, in about a month's time, they would have contacted us, because they were trying to get all the Roger Rabbit people over to Disney, because the film was such a success, so they wanted some of the talent from there. So we actually did a lot of work for them, and by asking to be a part of the team at Disney, they were like, okay, well, we'll start you as journeyman, and we'll start you at this salary. But a lot of the people who didn't make the way make their way to LA were getting offers for this much. So we kind of shot ourselves in the foot by
Well, that happened with the Animation crowd. When DreamWorks was setting up, the people that were in LA already got salaries up here. The people that came from London, they offered them down here. And the people in London thought, well, that sounds good. Because they don't know. They don't. Everybody else in LA is getting $3,000, $2,800 a week. And they were being offered $1,600. And it was like, they came over and it was like, wait a minute, the guy beside me is getting this and I'm getting this. It got to be really dicey, especially during Prince of Egypt. Because
that's I mean, and I had a little bit of that too. I mean, both James and I were pretty low paid, and even when we got promoted to supervisors, I mean, I was sitting at I was supervising Lumiere on Beauty and the Beast, and I was making several $100s less than the guy who was sitting next to me, who wasn't even a supervisor.
Right.
But my attitude was, you always have to prove yourself. I mean, my experience at Disney was always about that, always having to prove yourself, and it wasn't.
Each new movie, you have to do it all over again?
Each new movie, depending on who you're working with. When I got to Disney and I started working on
you got to Disney in what, 1990? Or
1988.
88? Oh, it's 88.
October 88. And
what was your first movie?
Little Mermaid. And they put me on that, and they said, okay, we're going to put you on, not Ariel. Ariel. Oh! And you don't want to say, I don't want to work on that, because you're there and you're going to work on what they tell you to. And I'm like, oh, Ariel, I don't know what to draw. I can't draw Ariel. I've been drawing rabbits for the last, the last 6 months. So
you were in Glenn's unit then, right?
Well, I don't know whose unit I was in. I was just given scenes, I guess. The thing is, at the time, Glenn and Mark, they were both vying for this position. I guess Glenn was the official lead on Ariel, but Mark wanted to be the lead. And I found this out later, that there was this sort of,
competition.
Competition between Mark and Glenn, who could do the best aerials or something. I think it was one of the reasons why Mark actually left and went to Florida. So, so he could, be away from Glenn and be top dog somewhere.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's all speculation, but that's kind of the feeling I got. So
you worked on Ariel for the whole movie?
Well, no, I was I got my first scene, and of course it wasn't just a scene where she's going, oh, let's go in there, let's do this. No, it was, but Daddy, all this stuff, and so it's all this angst, and Triton was chewing her out, and for the grotto and all that, and so I started to do these drawings, and you're looking in the mirror and you're drawing these lines on Ariel, and these sad lines, and she looked like she was like 70. And I was just like, I can't do this. This is so ugly, and I don't know what to do. So I went to Glenn. I said, excuse me, Mr. Keene, but could you do me a drawing? And I tried to sit down, and he just took a piece of paper and he drew over it. And I'm like, I can't draw that. I can't draw that way. And at the time, there's a certain way that you can still get that angst with very few lines. So keep her still pretty, but she still has that emotion in there without going to town with all the wrinkles and stuff like that. But I didn't know those cheats. I'd never drawn a character like that before. She was a very hard character to draw. And then I looked at Glenn's drawing, and then I said, well, I'll try Mark. And I went to Mark, and he tried to do the same thing, and I just didn't get any help. Because they were up here, and I was down here, and I couldn't reach that level at the time. So I went back and I did the best I could, and it still turned out ugly. But Philo, who was the lead cleanup on her, Philo Barnhart, he cleaned it up, brought it back on the model, and actually fixed it. So I was very thankful for that. But after those two shots, I was going nuts. So they said, well, we'll put you on Ursula, which is a lot more forgiving. Still a hard character to draw, but a lot more forgiving because she was a villainess. And so worked with Ruben, and that was really difficult too. I tried to do brought a lot of bad habits from my earlier days, from Sheridan College and things like that. We were, slowing down films like Dover Boys and looking at all these stretch drawings and white drawings. So there's one scene of Ursula that I did. It has these stretch drawings, and it's like, wasn't the right film to do that type of animation in. It's not a short. You need to be a little bit more.
But that's in the picture, right?
It's in the picture. Go ahead, make your choice. And these like, oh, I can't believe they.
So if you
approved
had
it.
it to do over again,
If I had to do over, those things would be gone so fast. Yeah, it would be a lot more feature quality. But again, you just do what you know, and so some of those shots turned out pretty good, and they actually let me do. There was an idea that I had where Ursula comes around the cauldron and conjures up a face of Eric, and I said, "Can we make Eric start to change and say Ursula's dialogue and have her face be pushed through?" And so I suggested that it wasn't just a face that dissipated. It was Eric's actually starting to talk before Ursula's face came through, and they liked that idea. So I felt, oh,
that's in the movie.
Yeah, so I got a couple of ideas in there and all that. Although I was, struggling with Vera Lamfer, who was the head cleanup on Ursula, and my stuff was off model, and John even told me of the 4 animators who are on Ursula, you win the prize for being the most off model.
Thank you.
Yes,
thanks.
But I went back and I was talking to Will. He said I told him that, and he says, don't worry about it. He said he told me a story about John, because Will was working on Grimsby, and Will said, I think if John were still animating, Grimsby would be the character that he'd want to animate. So he was a little bit more anal about that character, according to Will. And I think at one point he said, what this character needs is a really good artist, not necessarily yourself.
Now, John said that? Yeah. I've had more artists say, John's the nicest guy in a social situation, and he can just be a terror.
He's very, it comes
hard
through.
taskmaster.
Look at his caricatures; they get really biting. I had to. That was a very difficult time. Mermaid was a very difficult time, but those 2 were some of the best directors I ever worked with.
Yeah.
Because they were animators, so they would, unlike some of the people that came out of Story, they didn't care who got what shot. They would just say, "Yeah, give it to this guy. I don't care as long as it moves." That type of attitude. Whereas Ron and John would say, I want Glenn to handle this because this is a very special moment for whatever character. So I want Glenn to handle this. Nick, you need to do this shot because this sets up the character, and we really need that done by the supervisor, and they were conscious of that stuff. They knew what was important from an animation point of view, and so that was really helpful.
Yeah.
So, but that was again another baptism by fire with Ron and John. I was almost let go. A bunch of us were.
After Mermaid?
After Mermaid, yeah.
What was the reason? Because they didn't have anything for you to go on to?
No, it was because they didn't think much of our work, I guess. So there was maybe about 4 or 5 of us, myself. I think Chris Wall was in that group as well. They said, well, we would lay you off, but Rescuers Down Under starting, and we need people, so you're still on. And they assigned a bunch of us to the Dr. Mouse, which was only, had like 30 feet to its name. It's like, how are they going to fit? Everybody ended up on the Dr. Mouse. They didn't know what to do with anybody, so they assigned them to that. And
you each got 5 feet.
You each got 1 foot, I got. I don't know, but it was the problem. The funny thing about Rescuers Down Under is it was the brainchild of Jeffrey. Even
do a
then,
sequel.
Yeah, and they said, okay, what made the most money in its initial release? And they looked at the numbers and they said, oh, Rescuers,
Actually, Fox and the Hound made $3 million more. Of course, for inflation, probably not. domestically, but rescuers did a lot better in Europe.
Yeah, and so that's what they were thinking, I guess. So they said, well, let's do it to that. Let's do a sequel to that. So they looked it up, and as they were about maybe a fourth into production, they released Rescuers again in the theaters, and it bombed. And so Peter Schneider called all the animators and said, okay, well, we made it, we were going to do the sequel, and we, but we made a mistake, and it was the wrong thing to do, and we really shouldn't do it, but we're going to do it anyways because we're too far in, so let's just get this thing done and move on. And I'm thinking, is this like a pep talk?
Making you all feel good.
But the picture, still wasn't ready, so they threw me onto, they grabbed a bunch of us and put us onto this thing called Cranium Command. That was being done for the Pavilions of Life.
McEntee was on that, and wasn't Van Sitters on that? I can't remember.
I don't know. I don't think so. But a lot of people, Pete Docter was an animator on it. Kevin Lehman was an animator on it. Dave Proxima, Tom Cito, a bunch of us. Anyways, they brought us over into the Airway building, and Kirk and Gary, no, it was Rob Minkoff who was directing it. And that was a very interesting situation. Rob Minkoff...
His first directing gig.
Well, no, he did Tummy Trouble.
Oh, did he? Oh, before that. Okay.
But the interesting thing is, when I got there, Tom Cito said, yeah, Rob, he's interesting. He lets it change a lot. So they worked out a system that they would gather around when someone was showing a scene, and they would all laugh to try to get Rob to agree to, approve
Believe it.
Yeah.
Did that work?
Most of the time they say, yeah, it did. And they even did it for me. I remember Rob gave me a scene, and it was a scene of general knowledge. He was pacing, and he was, I don't even know what to do. I had this whole thing, and I acted it all out. He goes, yeah, that's good. And then I did a rough test, and I did the same thing. He goes, yeah, that's good. So I spent a week and tied the whole thing down, and he looked at it and goes, I don't know. I think maybe we should have him walk over here. And I'm like, While I was showing it, Tom, from the corner of his eye, saw it, and he walked up, and he looked at it and watched it, and he goes, I love that, the way he does it with the hands there. And Rob just looks at me, and I look at him, and, somebody else walked up, and they saw it, and go, oh, that's great, I love that, that's great. And I think Rob was starting to catch on.
Positive reinforcement.
Yeah, I think Rob was starting to catch on, because he eventually said, well, I'm going to Florida to direct Roller Coaster Rabbit, but if I was staying, I'd make you change it.
So he didn't stay to direct the whole thing?
No, he didn't stay. They grabbed two story guys, Kirk Wise and Gary Trousdale.
And they finished it.
And
And they were easier to please.
they were very, this was their first job, their first gig as directors. So there was this one shot at the end, it was like 40 feet of general knowledge. And it took me a couple of weeks to do. It was surprising. So maybe it took me longer. It probably took me longer. But I worked like a dog on this shot, and tried to get it as best as I could, do as much acting performance as I could. And I still wasn't completely happy with it, but it had to go out. And after that, we all went back to Rescuers, and I was still on Dr. Mouse, and Mike and Handel called me in and said, we want to talk to you about your role in this film. I'm like, oh, here it is, I'm going to be fired. They said, we saw your test on Cranium Command. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I just didn't have time. It was I had to rush through things, and there's a couple things I missed, and some of the in-betweens weren't there. And they went, we liked it a lot. We want to put you on Wilbur. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Never mind.
Yeah, right.
Forget I said any of that.
So they put me on Wilbur, and that was great. And at the time, Jorn Kluvian was the lead on it.
Yeah.
But it was really interesting. It worked out. Jorn was, did a bunch of stuff at the beginning to set the pace, and that was good. But he was some rock star or something in Denmark or something, and he would take off for like months. And he would never show up. He took leave of absences, and eventually they said, this is ridiculous. We need to get this thing done. So they called me in and they said, Nick, we want you to be the supervisor on Wilbur. And I'm like, that's great and all, but the picture's almost done. All the animation's been handed out. The character's designed. What's left to supervise? And they said, well, you'll get your name in the credits as a supervisor.
There you go.
Okay.
There you go.
I'll take that. I said, but I was having a little bit of a difficulty with Will. We were roommates, me and Will and Larry White. And Larry and Will were good friends, but for some reason I rubbed Will the wrong way. And now this would have just been, it was awkward. I was all of a sudden a supervisor. And, so they said, no, we have to put out a memo. Okay. So it was tense, but I
got through it.
Yeah, I got through it and got the credit. And after that, the next film up was Beauty and the Beast. And Duncan left and Kathy left. And so they needed supervisors. And they asked me if I would, do Lumiere. Don Hahn knew me from Roger. Kirk and Gary knew me from Cranium Command. And I took it. And that was a great experience.
Great, and it's a great character and a nice picture.
It is. I mean, I actually wanted Cogsworth. That's the one that appealed to me because of all the all that stuff that you could do, all this.
But in retrospect, are you glad you got Lumiere?
Well, Lumiere was very, it's this,
Maurice
it's that.
Chevalier.
Yeah, it's very suave, it's very slow, all that stuff. And but as for an animator, Cogsworth, there was so much more to him, and I thought I would be bored with Lumiere. But what I found was people really responded to that character, and so I'm glad they cast me for Lumiere because it was one of the more successful characters of it, and people hated Cogsworth because of his personality.
His personality. It was fun to animate, but the character doesn't.
Exactly. The animation was brilliant, but but they responded to the character, which is why like we were talking about before, you animate for your peers because they look at it and go, "That's great animation." They don't go, "Oh, I don't like that character. He's mean." So it sort of opened my eyes as to what type of character.
Now you went to a couple of Jerry Orbach recording sessions. Did you get anything out of that? See him work.
Yeah. He was great. There's only one time where he couldn't get a line, and it was Kirk was in the booth, I was in the booth, and we were sitting there, and there was this one line where Maurice picks him up, and he goes, "Hello," and he drops him, right? Well, basically it was, it's the way he said it was a scratch track, and Kirk did it, right? It was the old, Senior Winces, "Sodite, that type of thing, right? So that's the type of performance. But Jerry, we said, "Okay, action," and Jerry goes, "Hello, hello, hello, hello." And
didn't do it the way you wanted.
Did it. And I said, he turned off the sound. Kirk, that doesn't work. And he goes, "Yeah, I know. We'll try it again." I said, "Well, why don't you?" I mean, Jerry is like, he knows that Senior Winces thing. Why don't you, reference that? So he did. He said, "Yeah, we kind of wanted it like the Senior Wences thing, side-eye. So do it that way." Oh, okay. Action. Hello, hello, hello. And finally, Kirk just says, "Yeah, great, Jerry. Let's move on."
So what's in the picture?
So we get back to the studio. I say, "Kirk, this doesn't work. Why don't you just do it? No one's gonna know." And he goes, Okay. So that's actually Kirk Wise in the movie. It's
Really?
not Jerry at all. It's he went in and he did it. He did the final take on that, and you wouldn't know it. So it was. But sometimes they just you don't get it. The mental blocking. You can't push these people because unless you start giving them line readings, and then they get insulted.
Oh yeah, well, Barry Ingham did a line 200 times, and he did a different shading on Basil and Baker Street, Great Mouse Detective. He did a different line reading every time.
Wow.
And you have 200 takes, you go, which, and they're close, but he's shaded, because he was Royal Shakespeare, and he could do a little this, a little.
Wow, you think that many to choose from. There should be
Two,
more.
well, and then I think John decided that one.
Yeah.
But it was
Yeah.
amazing listening to him shade each one a little differently.
Yeah.
Because other actors, 200 takes, ah! They get angry.
Yeah, but he was. That was the only problem. Everything else was brilliant. He was just great to work with, and
Good singer too.
oh yeah, yeah.
And you never think of it. Today nobody thinks of Jerry Orbach as a singer because it's basically he's a policeman.
Well,
he's a detective.
Yeah, what's funny is that he, somebody gave me a Jerry Orbach record of Broadway. Jerry Orbach on Broadway. I didn't realize he sang. You just don't know it.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Whatever. Yeah.
At that time, his
Try
claim to
to
fame.
remember.
Well, at that time, his claim to fame was maybe a couple of. He had a Law and Harry McGraw series in the early '80s, late '80s, and he also was the father on Dirty Dancing. But the whole Broadway aspect of it, not too many people knew about
It's
it.
like I didn't think of him at all as anything but a straight actor.
Yeah.
And then it's like,
Well, what's funny is I met Jerry later. I called him up when I went to New York about 5 years after that, and we had breakfast, and I was just talking to him about different stuff, and he says, "Yeah, I'm doing Law and Order. It's basically FU money." That's how he referred to it. He says
he did that for years.
Well, yeah, he says I just want to retire, or this is just a way to be able to say at the end that I've made enough money, I don't need to work anymore. That's what Law and Order was to him.
Yeah, that's how most people remember him.
yeah. But anyways, that was a great experience. That production. Even though it was marred by a sad event, the passing of Howard Ashman.
Yeah.
That guy, even to the end. I mean, when we had a correction, he was sick during the making of it. We had a correction where we had to have "Be Our Guest" being sung to Belle instead of Maurice. He actually went through and rewrote the lyrics and stuff like that. It was
Wow.
Even though he was like extremely
Well,
sick.
the picture wasn't totally done when he died, was it? Wasn't it like 90% done?
I don't know. I mean, I
Or-
would say more like 80% done. It was, I'm not sure exactly when he died. I think it was in like late fall, late winter, early spring, and the picture wasn't done until like July or something.
Yeah.
So he saw a rough take of it, but that was about it. Which was really sad.
It's too bad. God probably had a lot of good stuff left in him
Oh yeah.
if he had gone on.
But that was. Other than that, it was a year in production, that film, and it was
You
very
were
stressful.
moving right along.
We were moving. Florida helped out and all that. It was really tough.
6 and 7 day weeks.
Yeah, I did an all-nighter on that. Actually 2 or 3 of them. It was intense because it was my first real supervising position, and so I spent a lot of my day checking other people's work, and so the only time you had to work was at night, where no one would disturb you.
Yeah.
And back then, animation supervisor wasn't just somebody going around and saying, change that, do this, do that, I'll be in my office, or I have a meeting to go to. It was, you were expected to do the most footage. You were expected to produce
And supervise everybody
and
else.
supervise everyone else, and do model sheets, and be there for meetings. So it was an eye opener. But the idea that you had your character, you had a control over it, that was something. You were in charge of this character, and you had your name on it. It was a matter of pride.
Oh, yeah.
It was a great experience, and I wanted to keep going. So I was thinking after Beauty ended, I was thinking, well, I did Lumiere. This is great. Well, the next picture up, Aladdin, directed by Ron and John.
Ron and John.
Who knew me from Mermaid.
Right. So you're back down in the rumble seat.
Exactly. And I remember going to John, and it's like, so I was thinking, I know a lot of people, and Eric Goldberg had just came over, Kathy Zielinski had come back, Duncan had come back. So they had their pick of the litter, and I said, well, I was thinking that, maybe I could take a minor character like the narrator at the beginning. Oh, no, Duncan's going to do that. I said, I thought Duncan's going to do a boo. Yeah, but he's going to do that too. I was like, well, what about like Jafar as the beggar? It's like, oh no, we're going to get Kathy to do that. Oh, what about no? What about? And I
So
said,
there was nothing.
And I looked at John and said, you don't want me to supervise, do you? Oh, okay. He goes, not really.
Oh,
So I just said, okay, that's fine.
what an ego deflator.
Well, all he knew was my mermaid work, and like I said, I was about to get laid off. If it wasn't for rescuers, I would have been laid off.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, well, at the time, I talked to Andreas, and he said, why don't you go on the Jafar unit? I really wanted to do Genie, but Eric, he was so intimidating. His work was so intimidating. I was afraid I'd fail. So I didn't want to approach Eric, but I really wanted to work on the Genie. But I was a little...
Cito told me about working on the Genie unit and with Eric. Yeah, they're good friends.
I mean, but it was intense. I mean, I was friends with Joe Hadar, and he was on the Genie unit, and he went through a time of learning, but it was a real difficult time getting some of his stuff through.
Well, Jafar's a good character. So how was it working on? How was it working in
Jafar, since I had worked on Ursula, I was kind of familiar with the villain type thing, and the great thing about Andreas was that a lot of the people that he had on his unit were really solid, and so we get sequences. And he gave me the whole introduction to Prince Ali, not the song, but what came after, where Jafar was introduced. And that was great to get an entire sequence where I could just go from start to finish, from this is Jafar, ecstatic, to all the way to...
Oh, that's one of my favorite scenes in the picture.
I have to get, all that. And in the meantime, they were doing live action shoots for this film, shooting live action for Jasmine and Aladdin, and they needed stand-ins for them to react to. So they say, why don't you be Jafar? Because you got the height, you got the beard, you're skinny, And since I didn't have much else to do, some of the Jafar stuff hadn't come through yet. They invited me to do all the live action reference for Jafar. But it wasn't live action reference for Jafar. It was just a stand-in. So
you were standing to the side for the other line.
Well, yeah, I would mimic the line, and the Aladdin guy who they were focusing on, he would do the Aladdin line and play off of me. And Ron Clements, he stood in for the Sultan.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. He's not quite short enough, and he's not quite heavy enough, but
yeah, but it was pretty funny. So I wish I had some of that footage. It's hilarious, and it was interesting because I had to do a kissing scene.
Where did you shoot all that?